When I look at the public support for really all of the big legislative pushes from this president, I constantly wonder if your specific plans and your vigorous defenses of them play into all of the support where the president's agenda has pretty obvious intersections with things you've championed. Does that ever cross your mind?
You know, what crosses my mind is I put out 81 glorious, juicy, detailed plans that were all about making America work, not just for a handful at the top, but creating opportunity for everyone. And we're starting to put some of those in place. And I am really excited about it. This is a moment in our history when we can do this. So much has changed over the past year. And when there's this kind of turmoil, a pandemic, a racial reckoning, an armed insurrection, a new president who won by more than 7 million votes, talking about a strong government response to big problems, that means it's time. It's time for us to step up. Persist is very personal, but it's also very public, and it's very much about what we do in the next 100 days.
How do you think this president has done in the first 100 days, and how often do you talk to him?
I think that this president has met the moment. He came in at a time when things were in chaos from Donald Trump, and he made a bold promise. And it's funny, now that he's done it, you forget how bold it was. He said he was going to deliver 100 million doses of vaccine. 100 million people were going to be vaccinated in the first 100 days. And I thought that was important, not only from a public health point of view, obviously, but also for saying he was going to assess how big is the problem, and he was going to come up with a solution big enough to meet it. He was glad to do it on a bipartisan basis, invite the Republicans in. Please come, join us, give us your ideas. But if Mitch McConnell was going to put his stick in the ground and not move, then President Biden was not going to be deterred. He rolled right ahead, and he helped Democrats, Republicans, and independents. Everybody who wanted a vaccine, he's out there for them.
You know, Andrew Yang has this great quote in a piece of reporting that Ashley Parker did in the Washington Post about the first 100 days. And I'm going to botch it, but it goes something like, you know, President Biden's magical power is that once President Biden is for something, it becomes the new reasonable. And I'm surprised as sort of a former Republican that there isn't a policy contrast being made. And I wonder sort of how much of that is that the country is on its knees and it's desperate for help and it is willing to reimagine the role of government in their lives. How much of it is sort of that sort of superpower that Andrew Yang talks about, that once President Biden's forward, it just becomes the new reasonable. And how much of it, again, is your years of work sort of softening the debates and taking some of the arrows around things you've championed for a very long time?
It's probably all of the above. But I think it's clear.
Yeah.
The American people want a government on their side. They want a government that can seriously and soberly assess what's broken and then talk about solutions. And look, when I talk about America, I'm not just talking about what Democrats want. Minimum wage passed in Florida last year, paid leave in Colorado, new education, taxing rich people so you could put more money into education, passed in Arizona. The things that we're out there advocating for, Americans want. A progressive agenda, childcare, cancel student loan debt, a wealth tax. Those are things America's ready for. Those are things that I like to think most Democrats are ready to get in there and fight for. It's the Republicans in Washington who are just out of step. And when Mitch McConnell says he thinks as a public servant that he was elected to go to Washington to do nothing, and to block anything that comes up, no matter how big the problem is, no matter how good the solution that Joe Biden and the Democrats put forward is, then what Mitch McConnell is really saying is that he's the one who's unreasonable, he's out of step, and he is not and does not want to be part of the whole governing process.
I mean, you just articulated what is perhaps one of the most under-noted accomplishments, in my view, of the first 100 days. This White House has successfully redefined bipartisanship in America for that which has bipartisan support in America. And Republicans aren't even part of the conversation. And I wonder, Senator, if you think, in your view, do you think they want to be part of the conversation? Do you think they, I mean, when you look at the poll, if we look at the polls and support for the tax increases to help pay for the agenda, there's bipartisan support for the tax increases. When you ask how are you going to pay for it, you're going to pay for it by taxing corporations and the super rich. I mean, I wonder if they don't have a hand to play, so that's why they're, trotting down to Mar-a-Lago and championing the big lie. I mean, do you think it's sort of policy bankruptcy, or do you think they don't have a hand?
Yeah, I think you've said this exactly right, Nicole. I think President Biden was exactly right when he basically redefined bipartisanship by saying if Democrats, Republicans, and independents across the country want it, that's bipartisan, and I'm going forward with it. And I think what's going on right now is that 40 years of trickle-down economics, 40 years in which the answer to every question that you asked a Republican was cut taxes and cut regulations, or let me translate that, help the rich and the powerful get richer and more powerful. That string has run out. And that enough Americans in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of what's been a K-shaped recovery, in the middle of seeing their children at home, of mamas who can't go back to work, of people who say, where is our government? What the Republicans have to offer is just not what America wants. And I don't mean by a little bit. I mean not what America wants by a big chunk.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. You should know that you can follow today's top stories and breaking news and catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.